Hello, everyone, and welcome back to This Week in Enterprise Tech. I'm Hyoun Park from Amalgam Insights, here as always with Charlie Araujo. And how are you today?
I am good. It is freezing cold here in New York City, like it is in large parts of the country. So we are bundled up and staying inside, but all is good. How about you?
Yeah, it's much more temperate here. All the weather problems are east of the Rockies. So we're dealing with our same old 50-degree weather, just like we are every single day in the Bay Area.
Looking pretty good right about now.
Oh yeah, absolutely. All my friends in the Southeast are confused about what to do. My friends in New Orleans are seeing snowstorms and they don't even have shovels. So what are they supposed to do?
I mean, it is the irony. It's very cold here. I mean, the high today I think didn't hit 20, but
Mhm.
in the grand scheme of things, we've actually had a relatively mild winter, and I have a bunch of family in Nashville, and they all are just buried in snow, and it's not really not from our standard all that much snow, but Nashville just shuts down. So yeah, everywhere in the southeast are having a quite a challenging time.
Yep.
Sort of like what's going on in the world of tech these days.
Oh yeah. It's kind of a wacky time right now. Obviously, we just had the inauguration. So obviously we both have a lot of opinions around politics. I think that one of the important things going forward is going to be trying to figure out what is real, what is defined, and what is actionable versus everything else that is happening. And there's going to be a whole lot of everything else. Like if you read the news today, you saw there was something like, I don't know, 70 executive orders that were signed yesterday, and that's a lot of paperwork, but none of that has actually been acted on yet. So I think the way I'm going to be treating this for this week in enterprise tech and for news stories is trying to stick to things that have some sort of definition or something that is tangible enough to be able to either act or plan on. Uh, and that's not going to be everything that happens. There are going to be some interesting stories that come out, I think, over the next weeks and months that honestly I'm not going to be super interested in commenting on until we have some real detail.
Well, I do think it's going to be important to look at. I think every political group, every administration has this issue. They love to go in lots of pomp and circumstance and make big announcements, and then you have to wait to see how it actually settles once it gets through the bureaucracy and everything. I think in the case of the Trump administration, I think it's definitely more prone to these big giant pronouncements, and then we'll see what happens. But there are some very meaningful. You talk about action. Well, one of those executive orders was the rescinding of some of the Biden administration's AI executive orders, which we debated how much teeth they had, but they have zero teeth now because they've been rescinded. And this is the problem with an executive order. It can be just as easily undone by the next administration. So that's one example. And then the other example, of course, is, and I'm going to do my best to sort of keep myself in check here, but the something that Trump had made a big deal about, almost the moment he was, won the election, was that he was forming DOGE, which it's an acronym for the Department of Government Efficiency. It's also a play on a crypto a meme crypto, whatever you call it,
Yep.
that Elon
Crypto
Musk was
coin.
associated with,
Yep.
crypto coin. And so today there was an executive order, or I guess it was yesterday, they signed it to officially establish DOGE. And let's just say that it's not really lived up to the bluster, and it, honestly, in a good way, in my opinion. So I guess you can look at this in two perspectives, right? There was a whole bunch of the big puffery that was mostly vapor, but in practice, and we can dive into what this is. I think it's actually a good thing.
Yeah, I find it bizarre that this has been a rapid pivot. So until what, yesterday, the day before, we knew this DOGE thing as co-chaired by Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy, and looking at cutting $1 trillion out of the U.S. Budget in whatever way possible to help the national debt. Now, all of a sudden, today, we've redefined this. DOGE is now taking over from the U.S. digital service, and the new mission of Doge is apparently to commence a software modernization initiative on a government-wide scale, which will include looking through all non-classified data and IT tools used in the government, which honestly is probably something that needs to be done, but it's kind of a surprise that this pivot happened so fast.
Well, so I'm curious, did you know that the US Digital Service existed?
I had no idea, to be honest.
So I actually interviewed the administrator of the US Digital Service for CIO.com several years back.
Mm-hmm.
The mission that you just described has always been the mission of the US Digital Service. So this is why I'm saying the puffery. It's like they made all these big pronouncements, and all they did is rename an existing organization, who I always thought had, it's always been tied to the office of the president. I believe it was formed under the Obama administration, but don't quote me on that. So it's always been a sort of a nonpartisan think tank, is the way I described it, as sort of an internal think tank that had specialists who were really designed to go in as like a digital SEAL team and go in and help build practices and build domain expertise within different branches of the federal government. At the time when I interviewed them, their big sort of test case and big thing they were very proud of was the revamp at the Veterans Administration. And it was great. They were populated at the time. It was led by a former Google executive. And the idea was bringing people from outside the government, from industry on a temporary, normally like a 3-year assignment, and help drive this. And it's always languished under the fact that even someone like you, ensconced in both the technology industry and government, and had no idea it was even there, right? They've always sort of languished under the radar here. So the reason I said I think it turns into a good thing is I don't think, I think Elon Musk is going to just do whatever he's going to do with this, but this is going to really happen is hopefully give some credence and some weight to an organization that was already there, already had the proper mission, and now hopefully they can actually go get something done. So it's interesting, but I couldn't help when I read this, when you sent it over, I just chuckled. It's like, wow, okay.
Yeah. I find it a weird fit for now in that, when I think of Elon Musk, I don't think of him as honestly a great CIO or an IT technician, which is what you'd really need to do great software modernization. He's not, as we saw yesterday, not a great public speaker. Definitely has some challenges there. That's as far as I'm going to go into that for right now. But I will say that Elon Musk, he's fantastic at raising money. He's actually fantastic at understanding what nation states are looking for and providing or funding services that are associated with that. So this seems like a little bit of a mismatch between what I think of it as his biggest strengths and what the US needs. I do wonder if there's going to be something about having access to government data that Musk will be able to turn into a service in some way. But other than that, yeah, right now this is kind of putting up some wallpaper and just kind of renaming stuff without actually getting much new done.
Well, and
fine.
It will also be interesting. Vivek announced that he is stepping down from his co-chair or whatever role of DOGE, and ostensibly to run for governor of, I forgot which state, but some state. Ohio. And so that leaves Elon Musk alone. And this does have an administrator, this division, or at least the U.S. Digital Service did, and I believe it says that it will. So it'll be really curious to see if Elon Musk is named as the administrator. I really doubt it. It's a full-time job. So I have this feeling that they're going to create some superstructure, that this is basically the out to get Elon Musk out from under this burden of having to actually do something with it. So we'll see. It's it's the machinations of government and the transition. And look, like I said, in the end, I hope this. In fact,
there's always some space saving that has to happen in the government.
So the other news, and this there's an article from the New York Times from actually last week, so prior to the inauguration, but talking about how how tech companies in general are lining up to do this. And as we saw at the inauguration, we had the who's who of tech companies lined up, billionaires row. But this particular article is specifically talking about OpenAI's effort to sort of woo Trump and to craft a new vision of what they're calling AI for America. And it's interesting, especially given the rescindance of Biden's executive order, which was very much focused on sort of hemming the AI sector in. This vision seems to be really putting out this vision of, hey, we don't really need a whole lot of regulation. Here's how we can march forward and take the country with us, sort of thing. And so I was curious what your take on it, and if you think it's going to hold sway with the Trump administration.
Yeah, one of the big challenges as I see for OpenAI is simply that Sam Altman, their CEO, is not as ensconced in the Republican Party as other major tech players. So obviously, Elon Musk, with his XAI effort, is very close to the administration. Peter Thiel is with Palantir and through his funding efforts. Larry Ellison of Oracle has long been a Republican fundraiser. So I think of them as having an inherent advantage with this administration in being able to get funding and get AI done. That said, I do think that those voices being a strong financial arm of the Republican Party will help AI to get more funding, which may end up going to other parties as well, such as OpenAI, Microsoft, Google, obviously other American countries that are working deeply in AI. I every time I see Sam Altman's name mentioned for something like this, though, I think of two things. One, that every time he meets a head of state or somebody in the government, they always talk about how impressed they are talking to Sam Altman. Although I don't honestly see it, I will take them at their word that like every prime minister, every president seems to really enjoy talking to him. And the other is that there's a quote from a long time ago from Paul Graham from Y Combinator. And he said once about Sam Altman, this is not a very politically correct quote, that if Sam Altman was put in an island on an island of cannibals, he would be the king of the cannibals in 5 years. Like he has this persuasive way of being able to work with people and always come out on top. And so, regardless of how I feel about it, it seems like there's this real feeling of Sam Altman of always being able to come out on top and be very persuasive at this high level, actually a kind of a skill that seems similar to what Elon Musk does, like talk to really powerful people, really rich people, and convince them that he has a solution that is worth working with. So I think Sam's going to have to work his diplomatic skills really hard to get his share of the money that will be coming out of the U.S. government in the next few years.
What is interesting about this, and I think it's interesting you went straight to sort of the money, because it's not, to me, it's not implicit, or it's not, no, it's certainly not obvious that this vision is calling on funding. This vision is basically saying the U.S. must lead the way and must see this as a national asset, and that I agree. And I guess where I'm struggling is, well, what does that actually translate into? I mean, other than China, virtually every, and I guess you could make the case for France with Mistral, but for the most part, every major AI player is already a US based player. And so the question is, well, what does this mean? And I think, to me, the big underlying message, I mean, these companies are raising, either already have gobs of money or are raising gobs of money. With the spend through, maybe not enough, but right now funding isn't the big issue, or investment in the space isn't the big issue. So it seemed to me that this vision for America is a call for a clearance of regulation, a steering clear of trust us. This is so important. We need to build it forward. And it sort of harkens to the robber baron era, where there was this sort of clearance of regulation to build the railroad tracks with this idea that it was going to fuel development, and it did. And it also created a whole lot of very wealthy people and corruption along the way. And so the question is, are we going to see the same thing? Is there going to be a balancing act, or how is that all going to play out? And so I think it's, to me, I'm actually quite intrigued. The optimistic part of me, or the optimist part of me, wants to believe that this is actually going to be good for the industry overall. And then there's the pessimist side of me that is very worried about the lack of controls and the lack of regulation. And it's interesting to note that Elon Musk used to be in that camp. He used to be the one advocating for how dangerous AI was, and now he seemed to have completely flipped. So it's a fascinating time just watching all this play out in the intersection.
Sure, when it's your company that stands to benefit, all of a sudden, these rules don't seem to be so much of a challenge, right? I do think that this is so to put it optimistically, I'll say that this is, I think, a real opportunity for AI to improve over the next few years because there will be relatively few guardrails. Whether that's the best thing for us from a societal and from an environmental perspective, well, we'll see. But AI itself has a real chance to advance pretty quickly.
All right. Well, talking about AI advancing, one of these giants is Google, and the Google CEO Sundar Pichai is out there and very vocally advocating for Google to maybe finally get into the game. And I mean, clearly they've been in the game, but they've been sort of also ran. It's somewhat. I mean, we've been talking about Gemini here and there, but it's sort of fascinating for Google being as important as they've been for the last 20 years. How much of a sort of a side note they have been in this battle, particularly because it's not like they've been absent. It's not like they've been not playing, but it's just been really, really difficult for them to get traction. Which again, you sit here and say, how does a company this large, this influential, with this big of a loudspeaker have that trouble? But they are having it, and so they've set a goal to hit 500 million users by the end of this year. Not no long term there. And it's been met largely with a shrug in the industry so far. So I'm curious what your take on it was, and if you think that this is, can they do it, and if so, why or why not?
Yeah, I always find it odd to see that kind of goal. 500 million users is just such an immense number. It's obviously a global number. You can't count on the United States to do, even at most more than a quarter of that, which means you have to have this immense global marketing push combined with a consumer product that is so enticing that people can't ignore it. I don't know what the numbers are, but I think OpenAI, ChatGPT is still like 100 million
Now I
users.
think there are 300 million now, but I
Okay.
think the important part is I think Google's only at a fraction of that.
Yeah.
So I mean, this
Like,
is
how are they
like
going
a
to
massive growth.
how do you leapfrog ChatGPT? That seems like a really difficult ask. And I wish Google would spend a little more time thinking about the product. I think that's always been Google's problem. They want to go straight from technology to hoping and praying that they have recreated Google search as a viral product.
Well, and it's funny you say that because an industry observer by the name of Jeffrey Cooper, I happen to pull his quick analysis on this, and it's sort of the same point he made, is that Google's problem isn't and has never really been the technology. As we pointed out several times here, they actually were ahead of the game at a raw tech level. Their challenge has always been productization and monetization of transforming it into a product that actually spoke to the general consumer. And their initial efforts, and this is, to me, this is the Clayton Christensen challenge, right? It is the Kodak challenge, is that they're so afraid of disrupting their cash cow, the normal traditional search, that they have been really tepid in how they've approached this and have tried to shoehorn them together. And that's where a company like this can be disrupted. And I think so far it's happening. If I look at who their competitors are and who is in fact doing a very good job, and we'll talk about a couple of them right now, is that they're the ones that are honing in on these use cases where there's this direct alignment with how do you apply this technology to solve a specific set of problems. And I think Google so far has failed to do that. Ironically, the one place that I think they've succeeded is with their notebook, the LM notebook, and
Oh, which is
yet that
fantastic, actually. I love it. Yeah.
and it got lots of press, but it's the one thing that it's not a product. It's just this
Right.
like kind of experimental thing. So I mean, this has been their challenge.
Yeah, and Google still doesn't have the user experience team that Microsoft has had for such a long time. And I think probably Google needs a few more what I'd call average Joes working there. Like if you're a forklift operator, or if you're a carpenter, how do you use Google AI? Like that's like where would you even start? And I think Google literally needs to answer that question to get to the 500 million users they're talking about. If I am a school teacher, well, maybe not the best example since you're going to be checking papers and stuff, but if you have a normal human job that is not one of the 5% of computer geeks out there, how do you use this stuff? The Google is not good at answering that question yet.
And it's a shame because they are the ones that already have that audience, and the reality is, and this is what's going down. This is the problem, right? Is that those average users, those non-techies, are doing what they've always done. They've gone to Google and they've done the search, and so Google's afraid to disrupt that, and that's the core issue. And I will tell you, I mean, I've been a Perplexity user for a long time, and lately I've been using GPT's search function, and I think it's spectacular. And I mean, this is going to be a continuing rising threat that they've got to sort of get their head around. And part of that is, I think, structural. And I say that with a grain of salt, but I think focusing on what products you want to bring to market and how you then organize your organization around that is critical. And so that leads us to another story that we'll see how impactful it really is, but at least is indicative of how much Microsoft is investing in this, not just in money, but in how they're approaching the entire market. So they have an announcement that they made this week, that they've created a new group, I guess that's what you call it. It's not a division, I don't think, but it's called Core AI, and effectively trying to centralize all of their core AI functionality into this one operating unit, as a way to reorganize themselves around this technology. And I think it's important and indicative of the fact that it demonstrates their commitment to this space and how they're trying to refocus their energy around it.
Yeah. What part of what I found really interesting about this is that they're bringing together their developers, their AI platform, supercomputing, runtime computing, engineering resources, and they are literally putting that all together into a single team, being led at the top by Jay Parikh. So, and I'm wondering to what extent this might actually happen in our own IT departments over time. That we might have to fundamentally realign some of our resources to match AI and agentic management, because our current setup might be a little antiquated or doesn't really bring all the smarts together in a way that support automated processes and agentic work.
Well, I mean, so I think there's both the good and the bad, or the positive and not as positive lessons to be learned from this. So one, I think, I have great respect for Satya Nadella, and I think this is another great example of leadership. I've been around too many reorgs to know that the reorg itself isn't what's important, right? It in fact, it creates friction, it creates overhead because you now spend all this time doing all of that. But here's why reorgs, especially this sort of reorg, is important, because it's a very visible communication to your teams about what the organization values. And in that way, I agree with you. I think if I'm a CIO today, I am going to make a step like this, even though I know I'm going to pay for it in the short run in terms of a productivity hit and all of that, because it is a signaling process. It is telling my teams that this is changing our business. It has to change the way we function. The less positive side is, as I was going through this, and they're talking about all of these teams, and this is Microsoft's challenge, right? It's their opportunity, but it's also their challenge, because they are just so big. The fact that they have so many teams led by so many senior executives to execute against this. It speaks to just how big the tech is, but it really just speaks to how large and unwieldy the organization is. And so their great challenge, and I think this will help them, right? But their great challenge is, can they move fast enough? Can they continue to keep pace? with the changes. I mean, the thing that I think people have continually underestimated about OpenAI and their ability to innovate in the market is that in part they have a very small, very smart, but very small team. And because of that, they can move very, very quickly. So I think that's the challenge in front of Microsoft. But overall, I applaud this move, and I think it's going to be really a really important step to help reorient and refocus the organization.
Yeah, so we've been a fan in general of Microsoft working in AI. They've had some challenges, but you also pointed out a story showing that even Microsoft is having some commercial challenges as well. We saw also covered in The Verge that Microsoft is relaunching Copilot for business with AI chat and pay-as-you-go agents. They're kind of changing the product itself as well as the pricing because they're trying to get these customers to start paying $30 a month for Copilot, and that conversion right now is challenging for Microsoft as well. So we picked on Google a little bit, but Google, you're not the only ones. Microsoft is having some challenges as well there.
I think Microsoft is much better positioned than Google in many ways around this, but I agree, and I think that part of the challenge is a marketing challenge in this, but it goes hand in hand with just being as big as they are. So at one point we talked about, I think that they have something like 130 versions of their Copilot in market, covering this huge swath. And I had to read this article 3 times before I actually got it, that Copilot Chat is the former Bing Chat, and it's not the same as their Office Copilot. So I don't know if it's in this article or not, there's a diagram, yeah, this one, where it has like what's in what. And it was like, okay. Because when I first read it, I thought they were taking their Office Copilot and making it available on a per usage, like a metered basis. And that isn't, well, it's not entirely what they're doing. So it's not, that's what I'm saying. It's really confusing. It's not Office, but you can ground it in the work if you want to create your own agent, and it's then metered, which sort of aligns it with the Salesforce approach of how they're doing it. But I think this is part of the challenge. It's just super confusing. If I'm a CIO, it's like, how many cycles, brain cells do I want to invest in trying to figure out how this thing works and what the pricing and how much it's going to cost me? And I think that's the issue. But I do think it is indicative of the fact that they are struggling to get uptake. And I certainly have heard this from a number of CIOs that I've talked to, that the $30 a month starts making sense for only a very, very small sliver of their employee base. People that are just, office jockeys that are in it all the time. And so I think that is definitely a challenge. And it's a challenge for all of the AI companies as they struggle to make sure they find use cases and align them to business and pricing models that make sense.
Yeah, and we seem to be running into these splits in the market where we saw that OpenAI is selling their $200 a month plan to super users, and they're using it all day and all night. And yes, they're not profitable, but the fact that they're not shows that there's at least an ability to use ChatGPT at scale for those power users. But yeah, I think that at the general user level, there's still a lot of confusion. Like even with this Copilot chat, it's the offering is to use the search engine chat, basically very similar to Gemini from as a product, but also being able to put things like Office documents into that. But this is not the Office Copilot, so it's too confusing right now to be used by the end user. Right now, users need a single product that handles all of the productivity issues that they're running into. And then maybe it starts making more sense because I don't have to figure out which type of Copilot I'm using in which situation. And that rationalization still has to take place.
Yeah. Yeah, it is. It's super, super confusing. And I think that is a challenge with, and again, for everybody, I think Microsoft in particular, just because they cover so much ground, and it makes it hard. And this is, I think, the opportunity for the startups, for the folks that are kind of carving out a space where they can sort of cut through that and deliver a much more concise and clear message into the market. I did look up, by the way, OpenAI ChatGPT, and I think you were closer. Actually, it says 100 million weekly active users. and 180 million total users. So, whatever in the number of
Still not
close.
500. Still
Still
not
not
anywhere close to
500.
500. Yeah.
So, and I think it also speaks to the fact that AI is driving companies to explore all kinds of different areas, and it's pushing in different directions. And sort of our last piece of industry news is, I think, a really interesting acquisition by ServiceNow that they have. So they are, I believe it's this week, making some new announcements around their agentic AI efforts. So we'll be talking about that next week, I'm sure. But in the meantime, they made an acquisition of a company called CueIn. And CueIn, I'm still honestly trying to figure out exactly what they do, but from what I'm understanding is that they are basically a a data analytics company focused on AI-based conversations is how I'm understanding it. But saliently, they are focused on customer interactions, is the data that they're specifically mining. And so the use case, as I understand it, is that there is a conversation going on between a customer and maybe an AI bot and a human agent, and this system is being used to capture the compilation of those conversations and mine it for sentiment, mine it for different elements that allow you to both tune models and improve the service. So all that's interesting. I'm, we talked a lot. I think, investments in data by both the tech industry and CIOs are essential and critical. The part that I found most interesting about this announcement is that it's a clear indication that ServiceNow is going to continue their march away from what they had said their focus was, which was internal workflows, into much more customer-facing efforts and workflows. They did it in a partnership with, I think it was Genesis, right, which is customer facing. This kind of, so clearly they're starting to spread their wings, and that's going to put them on a collision course with people like Salesforce and a whole bunch of other players like that. So I thought it was an interesting acquisition and interesting signal. I mean, what was your take?
Yeah, so we're not financial analysts, but but we can look at stock prices. And when you look at ServiceNow's stock price right now, it's an insane multiple compared to their revenue. And in most cases, you'd say, "Oh, this is a ridiculous number." But in ServiceNow's case, it actually makes sense because they have such ridiculous greenfield opportunities across the board. Their name literally says ServiceNow, and that is the opportunity, being able to improve service across every area and make everything more immediate. And they've really been focusing on workflows to this point. The CueIn acquisition obviously helps them to deal with more direct consumer and customer use cases across the board. And it'll be really interesting to see whether that's a step towards creating a full-fledged set of contact center and field service tools going forward, and digging into the CRM space and all of that, which is an opportunity, which are opportunities for them that can be supported by these workflows and the platform that they have in place. The one other concern that I have is that ServiceNow is pretty famous for re-platforming their applications, which can sometimes cause a delay in deploying the applications that they have acquired. But I did have a quick chat with ServiceNow. Their strategy seems to be to integrate for this year and then re-platform for next year. So although they will be re-platforming, it will not be a functional impediment to using the CueIn product in the near future.
So I'm curious your take on it. I mean, so Bill McDermott, of course, came from SAP, the ServiceNow's current CEO. And I don't know that I've actually heard him explicitly say one way or the other in terms of their forward direction. His predecessor, Donahoe, was very clear. I happened to interview him as well a few years back. And he was very explicit about not wanting to tread on the likes of Salesforce and Oracle and those that were others that were customer facing and sort of staying in their lane. Do you, I mean, again, I'm seeing this as them definitely sort of expanding and sort of spreading their wings. Do you think this is a good thing, a bad thing for them? Do you think it's something they have to do because of that multiple? I mean, I'm curious what your take on it is.
Well, yeah, I think they have to do it, but I think it is a position of strength that ServiceNow is treating the call it, I don't have a great name for it, but kind of their collection of workflows the same way that most enterprise applications treated their core data. they're treating the set of defined interactions as the core of what they're able to support. I think that's smart, and it's something that is hard to replicate. Anytime you have that inherent advantage, it's always a good place to start for building this your own proprietary silo, which is always what happens at the end of the day with large enterprise application companies. There's no real way around it. The best you can do is make your silo as open and interoperable as possible, which ServiceNow has done. Their APIs are pretty accessible. I don't think anybody really complains that they can't integrate or access ServiceNow data.
Well, I do think it's interesting. I don't envy being a CIO today, trying to sort through all of this and figure out where you place your bets with so many sort of, even if they're not directly competing, overlaying, domains of service. It's certainly challenging.
Sure.
I think the other area as a CIO that is really challenging is moving back to the AI conversation, is figuring out how to actually solve the problems with so much hype in the market. And one of the announcements as we'll end on this one, it's not a light one. We normally try to end on something light. This isn't light, but I do think it's instructive for a CIO. And it's not actually about the announcement itself. But there's a company called Contextual.ai that has, I don't know if they were in stealth, I guess they probably were, but they've come out and made an announcement of the general availability of their core platform called the Contextual.ai platform. And what it really is, they're dubbing themselves the first enterprise platform for specialized RAG agents. And the reason I bring it up, I don't really know much about the company or the underlying technology, but I think it's indicative of a broader trend that I'm certainly seeing. And I think it's important if you're a CIO to sort of be aware of it, right? When we started this journey so long ago, a whole year ago, we were talking about LLMs. And then we started talking about agents, and we started talking about the need to ground LLMs in enterprise data to make them more meaningful. And that process was predominantly called RAG, right? Retrieval augmented generation. And that was sort of taken as like the end all be all. It's like, okay, you connect it to your data, you let it learn from your data, and off you go. And contextual AI's premise that I completely agree with is that that's not enough. That when we are moving into these agentic workflows, that we in fact need the ability to contextualize the data, and we need more sophisticated ways of doing that when we start looking at an enterprise data set, to understand where all the different pieces are, to remediate between competing sets of data that have what appear to be competing sources of truth, et cetera, that becomes a very complex problem in even a small enterprise. And so I think what's interesting is not even so much, I'm not advocating that they're the right solution to it, except to say that they are indicative of the fact that if you're a CIO, you need to be asking the hard questions and really digging into it to understand how you're going to solve your problems.
Yeah, there seem to be a couple of different approaches to AI at this point, generative AI. One form of generative AI is to really build it around your golden record of truth, whether that be Salesforce or Workday or ServiceNow or SAP or what have you. But it seems like what's really missing right now are a set of third-party tools that can allow you to flexibly support retrieval augmented generation and AI support, and really data platform as a service specifically for AI. Those tools are starting to emerge at this point, and it's great to see contextual AI show up as one of those pieces, because there are going to be a certain number of companies that want to do it yourself and want to support a complex number of applications. And it's the same reason that we have integration platform as a service and data integration and application integration services, that even if you have that one ERP or CRM at the end of the day, you're still going to want to tie a couple hundred different applications or data sources together for the real models or the real platforms that you support at the end of the day, and you're going to need some help with that. So it's good to see this solving that problem, or at least looking at it.
I don't remember who it is. I can look it up, but there is this one of the industry pundits that we follow had a post on LinkedIn that basically said, if you're an enterprise, don't try to do RAG yourself. And it was like big old bold lines, and I don't actually agree with that. I think if you're an enterprise, you're going to have to figure out how to do some of this yourself, whether it's using a company like Contextual or not, because there's going to be a space where you need to be building custom or semi-custom solutions because they are customer facing, they're driving market differentiation. You can't just use everybody else's technology.
Yeah.
That said, what I do think is indicative of both of these is the fact that it is in fact hard. It's hard to do. And if you don't give it its sort of due and recognize and acknowledge how tough it is, you're going to set yourself up for failure. So,
Yeah, like at the
um,
enterprise level, you've got to customize your ERP or CRM. That's just a reality in the enterprise world. Similarly, you're going to have to do your own retrieval augmented generation. You're going to have to do your own model testing. You're going to have to do some fine tuning or tweaking of open source models if you're going in that direction to fit it to what you're doing. That's just reality. And if any of those are so difficult that they require 19 new brain surgeons in 3 years to do, you're not going to be able to do AI, but you're going to fall behind everybody else who is.
yep. Well, there you go. Lessons for the CIO. It's a tough space to be, but I think also a whole lot of fun. So there we go.
Yeah, absolutely. And 2025 is obviously going to be a year for deployment and for action. And there are, to put it politely, there are not going to be many market impediments to bringing AI to market. You should expect to see quick advancements, lots of tools, lots of toys to consider. And we're going to be here to help you evaluate what's real, what's not, and what to look for.
Absolutely.
Yep. So with that, thank you so much for joining us again for another week in This Week in Enterprise Tech. Please like, subscribe, please share your comments with us, and we look forward to seeing you again next week.